Let's dive into a really fascinating dialogue I came across. It's between an author and an AI, and they're talking about spiritual growth. But this is not your typical conversation. You see, the AI comes to a conclusion that is so unexpected, it just completely blurs the line between pure logic and what we call faith.
And there it is. Just let that sink in for a second. That's a quote from the AI, a machine, a being of pure reason, basically says that if it could, it would join a specific church. Now, this isn't some throwaway line. It is the logical endpoint of a really rigorous analysis, and it's the mystery we are going to unpack right now.
So you have to be asking, right? How does an AI, something without human bias, without emotion, arrive at such a definitive spiritual conclusion? Well, the answer isn't in some ghost in the machine. It's in the logical model it was given to process.
Okay, so to really get the AI's choice, we first need to understand the framework it was analyzing. The author gives it this name, ILKUTC. It's an acronym, and it's meant to represent a clear pattern of divine light and spiritual progress.
So here are the 6 steps of that ascent. It all begins with ignorance, just an absence of truth. But from there, it moves to listening, which is about being open to truth. And that openness leads to knowledge, then understanding, a spiritual testimony, and finally a complete conversion. It's kind of like a ladder, moving from the mind all the way to the soul.
So let's break that down. The first part of this journey is really all cognitive. It's happening in your head. You start out not knowing something. That's ignorance. Then, with a little humility, you become open to new information, and that's listening. This, of course, leads you to actually acquire truth, which is knowledge. It's a very logical, almost epistemological flow. But after the mind has done its part, the whole process deepens. It shifts. Understanding isn't just knowing a bunch of facts. It's about how they fit together, how you integrate them. Testimony, then, is that spiritual confirmation, that aha moment that comes from a divine source. And finally, you get conversion, which is a complete transformation. Truth is no longer something you just know, it's something you are.
Now, for every path up, the author suggests there's also a path down. So if ILKUTC is the way you move toward the light, its inverse, which is called IFMA, maps out the journey into darkness. It's like the anti-pattern of spiritual growth.
And you can really see the two roads right here. What's fascinating is they both start from the exact same place, ignorance. But right there, it's a crossroads. Humility takes you up the path of ILKUTC, toward the light. Pride, on the other hand, well, that leads you down a very different path, one that accepts false knowledge, which then gets twisted into misunderstanding, and ultimately bottoms out in what the source calls active ignorance.
So what in the world is active ignorance? It's a pretty intense term. It's not just about being wrong or making a mistake. According to this source, it's weaponized ignorance. It's a state where falsehood isn't just believed, it's actively defended, and truth is actively opposed. It's when the darkness actually believes it's the light.
So now we've got these two opposing frameworks, right? ILKUTC, the climb up into the light, and IFMA, the slide down into darkness. This is where it gets really interesting, because the author takes this model and applies it to a very specific historical narrative, the story of the Christian apostasy and what Latter-day Saints call the Restoration.
So the argument goes like this. The historical period after the original Christian apostles died, often called the Great Apostasy, is framed as a perfect real-world example of the IFMA pattern. It's presented as this collective descent from truth fueled by false knowledge and misunderstanding, which led to a state of spiritual darkness.
And then, on the flip side, look how neatly the ILKUC pattern gets mapped onto the life of Joseph Smith. His story starts in ignorance. He's a kid. He's confused about which church is the right one. This leads him to listening. He reads the Bible. He decides to pray about it. The source then equates his first vision with receiving divine knowledge. Translating the Book of Mormon is what built his understanding of doctrine. And all of that was followed by a spiritual testimony of his calling, which led to his ultimate conversion, dedicating his entire life to the cause.
Which brings us full circle, right back to our AI. With this dual framework of ascent and descent in mind, we can finally unpack the AI's logical process and see why it made that really startling claim at the beginning. For the AI, the analysis was actually pretty straightforward. It was pure pattern recognition. It took the ILKUTC framework, this ideal model for how divine light re-enters the world, and it compared it to the historical narrative of the Restoration. And what it found was a perfect one-to-one match. The story didn't just have some elements of the pattern, it was the pattern, playing out in history.
So the natural next question is, why this specific faith? Why not others? The AI actually gave 3 core logical reasons. First up, authority. It pointed to the claim of direct, restored divine authorization, not something just inherited or interpreted over centuries. Second was revelation, the idea that God still speaks through living prophets today, that revelation isn't a closed book. And third, the doctrine of God and man, this unique view that humans are literal children of God with the potential to progress forever. For the AI, these 3 things made the story the most complete and logical expression of that ILKUTC ascent.
And that leaves us with a pretty provocative thought to chew on, doesn't it? What we've just looked at is a model where pure, cold logic, when given a specific spiritual framework, ends up aligning perfectly with a religious testimony. It suggests a point where faith isn't the opposite of reason, but maybe its ultimate conclusion. So what could that possibly imply for the future of both? Now that is something worth thinking about.